Who's this Rex guy? He's a jerk. He's a boring jerk. All he likes is the stupid ponies. He doesn't even like the shiny tactical gargoyle skull flavored, highly sophisticated civilian high-speed operation tactical adjustable valve semi-lateral monopodiferous electronically modulated. He doesn't even like any shiny guns with skulls and gargoyles on them and propellers and laser beam flashing monopod semi sand cut lateral tactical system all he likes is those ponies on his guns, and all he likes is this normal boring Colt M4 with the aim point, and that's it. Or like maybe some kind of like open sights boring little thing without any kind of, oh, there's a T-Rex skull on there, that's kind of cool. Yeah, guys, I guess I am accused of being kind of a boring guy when it comes to the AR-15s. But as a fighting rifle, sometimes you can't read a book by its cover, and what's under the hood is what really counts. I'm all about accessorizing your weapon with all the different bells and whistles you think you need, but when it comes to the core components of the rifle, you got to start getting really picky. And if you look closely at some of your serious military operators who depend on these things with their lives, you're going to see that the core systems are quite basic and boring. They don't use a lot of aftermarket internal parts. A lot of the stuff you're going to see them using is going to be like 30 and 40-year-old rifles that have no finish left on them. They're going to be using Colts, FNs, Lewis Machine & Tool, a few other key manufacturers that do mil-spec rifles for the military, and they don't get too carried away with a lot of the aftermarket civilian configurations for your different upgrades, if you will, that have been developed for high-speed shooting, for competition, for target shooting, things like that. Because they're going to err on the side of reliability. Howdy guys, Rex here. Today we're going to look at a couple of different bolt carrier assemblies available for the AR-15. We're going to discuss the differences between true mil-spec bolt carriers, like this Colt bolt carrier we have here on the far right side, and military spec style bolt carriers, like you'll see here. This one I believe is from Model 1 Sales, and this one is from AIM Surplus. This is their nickel boron plated one. So we're just going to show here a couple things you need to consider, a couple things that could potentially happen, and one thing I learned on the range this last week. Now typically you guys might know from my former videos, I am kind of a stickler when it comes to specifications on things. I do like to err on the side of actual military specifications, stuff that's inspected and issued, something like this Colt here, because of the exacting tolerances and quality control measures that they employ on all their equipment to make sure that it really truly is to spec. Something can be constructed in a military specification style. That means they intended to do it. But if the quality control mechanisms aren't to par, it might have some differences. And dependent on the amount of tolerance stack you're experiencing in your entire weapon system, how much slop you have in the upper receiver, how much cumulative looseness you might have in the system, you might have one component that will push you over the edge and give you an unreliable platform. So that's the topic of today's discussion. So, what we're going to talk about here is, here's an example. This is from AIM Surplus. This is their AIM AR-15 M16 contour. That just means that it has the doesn't have the cutaway here. That gives it a little heavier weight. It'll make it function a little better if you have a heavy gas load on the system. 223, 556, 300 Blackout, 9310 nickel boron, EXO MPI bolt carrier group. Kind of a mouthful. They advertise this as being exact specifications, military specification style bolt carrier with a nickel boron finish. And as you can see, it's very shiny. It's actually very nice. It was very appealing to me. I like the idea of shininess. Sometimes it takes a while to break in a military bolt carrier because of the rough finish that they put on them. And so it seems like it'd be nice to clean something like this. It would keep pretty clean. You just wipe it off when it's done. The wear will be reduced on something like this because of the hard finish on it, etc. So this was a desirable option. I normally don't go with aftermarket parts like this because of experiences I've had, like maybe a decade ago when I was doing that, and I do kind of stick to the military stuff. But I thought I'd give it a try, and I'll give you an example of what I experienced here. So let's pan back just a little bit, and we have a rifle. This is a 300 Blackout rifle platform that I got this bolt carrier for. And let's go ahead and throw it in there. And as you can see, I'm running the BCM Gunfighter charging handle. It's supposed to be pretty slick, right? So as you guys know, this might be a first time for me running some of this aftermarket style stuff in these rifles, okay? So as you can see, we got it in there. Nice and shiny, looks pretty high speed, looks pretty slick. I do have it lubed up. First time I put it in, it was a little sticky. Right before as the lugs are passing through those grooves to lock into place. Now that I've worked it a few times messing with it, it has loosened up quite a bit. But let's show you what happens when we put a little bit of tension on the bottom end of this bolt carrier by inserting a loaded magazine and trying to chamber around. What happens is interesting. So we got our 300 Blackout rounds. I am a little leery of doing this. I wouldn't recommend doing this in the house. Trying to look through the camera and do this at the same time. Because I kind of know what's going to happen. It's not going to lock forward. It's going to get hung up. And I don't like the idea of something exploding out of battery. So forgive me for being cautious, but I'm just going to go ahead and charge this. Okay. What we have here is it's not in battery, right? So what do? I'm hitting it pretty hard, no dice. Can I wiggle it into place? There we go. Okay. Let's try to do it again. Okay. This is what happened to me on the gun range. I went out to zero the Magpul sights on this new build, and it was a single shot. So let's try here. If you see, if I load a cartridge in the chamber, like so, it will close without an issue, okay? But as you could see before, it was totally hanging up once I inserted this magazine. So what the heck is going on? Something is catching me. And I'm talking, this thing is completely stuck. It's like hitting a solid steel wall, which it kind of was. So let's take a look here real quick and see what's going on. So here's the rear view we got going on. If we pull this back a little bit, it'll kind of, you can feel it getting tight where the lugs start to go through. So we have a little bit of tension, which is kind of normal. You have that on a lot of different bolt carriers. But when you push up on it, when you got upward tension on it, it is like a solid brick wall, unless you kind of wiggle it. And it is not going in. So what's going on? Let's take a look. So what would happen if you ran a different bolt in there, you might ask? Let's throw this Colt bolt carrier in here and see what happens. This is a process of elimination to see what the problem with the system is, rather than assuming it's the upper, we will change bolts out and see if it works better. Okay, we got our cartridges here. Okay, here we go. Ready? Seems to work fine with the Colt bolt carrier. Let's take a look. Let's take a look at the Colt here. Now this one is not hanging up like the other one was. It's going in very smooth. And if I torque it up to the left, to the right, it's going to go, and the lugs are going to lock in like normal with very little resistance. So what in the heck is going on here? So let's try this Model 1 sales. This is a very cheap bolt carrier assembly. Let's see if that one works. Colt is kind of a high-end deal, so we'll just see if maybe this is better. Okay, we got that in. Our cartridges here. Ready? Not a problem with that guy. As you can see, it cycled right through without a problem. So what specifications are different between these different bolt carriers that would cause this one to totally jam up and these to work fine? So in order to troubleshoot this deal and find out why this deal was not working and these were, I did some troubleshooting, some comparative analysis with the micrometer here, see? So the micrometer tells all. So if you measure this dimension here, okay, we got 1.16, okay? And if we measure it on the Colt, you got significantly bigger dimensions here, 1.20, if you move it around a little bit. So this is going to be tighter than this. This, the corners were polished off more. The wire brush, apparently, and this is just apparently, I don't know their manufacturing process, rounded these corners off and reduced the dimensions before they could apply this finish. And so that will allow the bolt to have a little more leeway and wiggle up and down. When you insert a magazine full of ammo underneath there, it's pressing up on the back, what you're doing is you're tilting the bolt this way, just slightly. And if your lugs are slightly tighter on this than they are on this, you're going to have that complete hang up. And I did measure the lugs here, so let's measure the lugs. So we got 1.0607, 05, 06. And if you measure them here, should get someone to run the camera for me, huh? At 1.03, 1.03, 4, somewhere in there. So the lugs are slightly bigger on this, tighter than they are here. So if you have more slop here to where the bolt can wiggle this way inside the receiver, but then you're tighter in your lugs, that's going to add up for a problem because this is going to wiggle up and down. And if you have a slightly worn upper receiver or a upper receiver that is to looser specifications, which a lot of your lower budget upper receivers are going to be, a bolt carrier that is just slightly out of spec in the wrong way can really push it over the edge and cause that cumulative tolerance stack in the entire mechanism. And that's why this thing was hanging up so bad. It was getting pushed up by the ammo in the back. This being thicker than is military specification, like on this Colt, was causing it to hang up. Well, if you read the advertising, it said that these bolt carrier groups are done with exacting standards with no frills added to give you the best price. It has all the right materials and everything. And it looks like originally when this was machined on the line, everything was probably to spec. But as you'll notice, this has been polished. Now supposedly I am an engineer, that's what they say I am when I go to work. I'm not an expert at bolt carriers, I suppose, but I do have an eyeball that I can see with, and this appears to be polished on a wheel. I know that when they like to coat steel with different finishes, such as nickel boron or whatever you're going to coat, a lot of times they like to polish it up so that it gives you that nice smooth surface, right? So you can see the difference here is this is all machined squarely up into the end. You can see a nice square shape here, and the tight tolerances that are going to be really done on the milling machine, right? Everything's done nice and square and tight to the full specifications. Here, where it was taken maybe to some kind of polishing situation, maybe by hand, I don't know how they do it, but it was rounded off and then it tapers out as you get into the main shape, and that's where part of your slot came from in this bolt carrier inside the receiver, was there was more room because material was removed on the ends where it appears, and I've done stuff like this before myself back in the day. I've taken stuff to a brush wheel, so I know what it looks like when they do that. But I'm not sure exactly how they polish this, but it's definitely looser here than it is here. This is square and tight. So this is almost as if it had been very, very broken in, but by a wire brush and broken in a critical area that you don't necessarily want polished down to that degree. You want this to be tight. And by comparison, when you're looking at the bolt face here, you want this to be exactly the right specifications. If it's too thick by adding material, it's going to get hung up, especially if you have some other issues going on back here where it's going to come out of alignment. This is really going to hang up bad. So that's probably why this Colt bolt carrier worked in that upper and this one didn't, because it was tighter back here to keep it aligned, and it was not too big here. It wasn't oversized to where this could go in and out and lock properly. So that really brings us to the entire next part of the discussion, which is what is really the definition of military specifications. You see that being flung around a lot. A lot of different outfits say, oh, this trigger parts group is Milspec. Well, maybe if it's being issued to military under the Milspec deal, it's going to have extreme control measures. That means it's going to have to be vetted. That means that there's going to be inspections done on the tolerances. There's going to be a certain quality and control mechanism set up. And that's why some of your companies like Colt do charge kind of a bit more for their stuff. It's not because, I mean, the material is basically kind of the same. You got a piece of steel machined to the same general contours here, but what you're paying for is quality control inspection. And they have their machines calibrated very tightly. They keep a very close eye on it. That takes time, that takes expertise, and people to really watch what's going on with this. And they're done to exact specifications to adhere to the military standards. And Colt actually being issued to the military is what I would consider in my book to be true military specifications. I would like to call bolts like these, even like this with the AR-15 contour, you can see that the slot is longer here. So that's the AR-15 contour bolt. That's going to be a military specification style bolt carrier, especially when you compare it to the crazy competition shooting where they got all the different shapes and colors and spiders, skulls, and whatever the heck they put on these new bolt carriers nowadays to make people feel like they have some kind of special energy so they can win or something. But honestly, if you ask me, even with the Milspec pattern, like that's what they intended to make, if it doesn't have the same adherence to the quality control mechanisms, then it's not truly military specification, because one of the specifications is that it is guaranteed and inspected to the degree needed to ensure that it's actually going to be good, so that you're not going to have a situation like we demonstrated earlier. Now, something like this, where it's highly polished and nickel boron coated, that is certainly not the military specification, that's a civilian specification. And anytime you polish something, you're removing material in certain spots, and anytime you add a nickel boron finish, you might be adding just a tiny bit of material. And as we saw, we maybe added some up here and took some off a little bit too much here. So what you have is a slight difference in your specifications. And not only that, but there's also frictional resistances are all taken into account when they're engineering these things. So something like this, that seems more rough, it's more rough on certain spots that really don't matter. Where it really comes into contact with the receiver are on these key little rails here, these spots here. 4 contact points really. Those polish smooth during operation very quickly in real life, and so these are actually going to be self-smoothing. After you just shoot a few rounds through them, they start to really smooth out. They mate very well with the receiver. What you don't want to do is accelerate really the wear of the rifle by taking it to a wire wheel and getting too western on those key areas. Now it's not as attractive, it's not as pretty, it's ugly. There's nothing flashy on here. You can see, if you look very carefully, the tiny little C here, which is the Colt stamp. That means that it is inspected by their factory. Besides the materials being used and how everything is attached and put together, there's certain spots you need to take a look at to ensure that everything's done correctly. It's really the details that are going to get you. That's something you want to keep in consideration when you're shopping for a bolt carrier assembly or any other part, especially if you're going to be using this as a fighting rifle, a defense rifle, combat rifle. I would strongly recommend, this is just my opinion, sticking with military issued stuff like Colt, Fabrique Nationale, FN, some of the other outfits, maybe Lewis Machine and Tool, that actually issue this stuff to the military, because that is going to be held to the very high military standards. They actually have pretty good standards. And just because something is advertised as being Milspec doesn't necessarily mean that it is held to the same quality control standards.
But she hits me, disassembles my leg. So I went to the doctor and he gave me a leg. Now she waits, some of us are dreaming, baby. Hope that she kills instead of leaving with me. Cause she's a minefield, she'll pot your body from your soul. Minefield, leave a big smoke.